I'm Yonit Levy of Channel 12 in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian in London.
And we are Unholy from Keshet Podcasts, Two Jews on the News. Hi, Jonathan.
Hello, Yonit. I'm imagining that you're talking from a room underground, you're in a shelter or something like that. That's what I'm assuming.
Well, right now I'm in our studios, but very close to a shelter. It's definitely, it's been a week since last we talked, but it kind of feels like a year. To be honest, and not a very good year. I don't think I thought I'd say this so soon, but I actually missed 2020. It's really been a tough week here.
and it's a tough day because we're talking very late at night. It's after midnight your time, Thursday into Friday. You've been on air, I know, for hours and hours. But I mean, sleepless nights, right? Because rockets are going off, explosions are sounding all around you.
Yeah. First of all, I think the whole country, collectively has not slept for 3 nights. Hundreds of rockets at all times of day. People, I guess I can say the people in central Israel feeling what people of southern Israel and then the Israelis living in the vicinity of the Gaza Strip have been feeling for years and years, which means sirens in the middle of the night, direct hits, schools are off, and also casualties in Israel, including children, of course, in Gaza. The destruction and devastation as a result of Israeli attacks, and also casualties, and also including children. So really just a horrible week. And we didn't even mention, and we will talk about this, of course, the riots in cities across Israel, riots between Arabs and Jews, in especially what we call mixed cities around Israel, all that contributing to, just a dismal feeling around, and everybody feeling quite depressed, honestly.
Yeah, no, it's an absolutely grim feeling, and people who feel themselves bound up with Israel and with Palestine from both sides. In other words, Palestinian diaspora, Jewish diaspora, Jews around the world, Muslims around the world. Everyone feels involved with these things, and I say these things because it feels like they come around at intervals. We were here in 2014. We were here before then in 2009 with Operation Cast Lead. You can go further back to the Second Intifada, and there is a kind of a process with these incidents where there's an initial flare-up and people argue about who exactly started it, and then you are into and whoever won which is first, people will argue, but you get into rockets on Israel, you got airstrikes on Gaza, and people watch the death toll tick up on both sides, and people count the number of children, and you just put your head in your hands wherever you are, and you grieve for this situation which seems to recur, in the most sort of macabre Groundhog Day again and again. But the thing that I think is different, and you mentioned it, is this element of the mixed cities. And I heard somebody saying, this time the fire is inside the house. And that is a new and frightening development. I know it happened, for that crucial week in October of 2000 as well.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you have to go quite far back into history, it feels to me, almost, the pre-state period and Hebron riots and so on. But just tell me what that's like. Does that feel like a different order of grimness and even fear when, I read tonight, the synagogue in Lod has been set on fire
it's
again.
The fifth that has been set on fire.
That's right. This keeps on happening, and just horrible stories of lynchings, attempted lynchings, people being pulled out of cars. There was video circulating of people bursting into, Jews, I think in Haifa, bursting into the apartment, the home of an Arab family. You're there, you tell me.
Well, you mentioned that it adds a sort of another layer of grimness, and it does, because that the war with Hamas will end. I mean, it will end in a few days, it will end in a few weeks, until the next kind of skirmish. But we, Jews and Arabs, have to live together in this country, and this kind of fire that has been set, that has been lit around the different cities in Israel, is really been frightening. It started in Lod on Tuesday with Arab vigilantes basically burning, as you said, the synagogue, 3 synagogues and houses and cars. And then what added onto that a day later were Jewish vigilantes on the other side, and just mobs in the street kind of fighting each other. And as you said, there were attempted lynch, in one case it was a Jewish man, in another case it was an Arab man. You kind of couldn't follow this, I can tell you about the broadcast yesterday, which was 6 or 7 hours long. And it started with us reporting about the rockets falling on Tel Aviv. And then it turned to this, and we kind of focused on that for the whole program while there were still rockets falling around Israel. It's like you kind of find yourself, that person with all the plates in the air trying to figure out, what are you actually talking about and what will this country look like the day after? And again, Jonathan, we were on the cusp of an historic shift in this country. And we talked about this on our podcast, about the fact that after years of tension around this issue, it looked like an Arab party would be part of a coalition one way or the other. And you saw these, I don't know if we mentioned this, after Meron, and there was overwhelmingly a Haredi story, ultra-Orthodox story. There were Arab families in the northern part of Israel who were bringing in the Haredi people into the community after this disaster. I mean, there were beautiful stories of cooperation. And suddenly this blows up. And I guess as humans, we have a lot of walls of denial, right? We want to think about everything being better than it is. And suddenly you think, wait a minute, there's so much hatred here between, again, we have to say these are the extremes, right? 90%, 95% of the Jews and 95% of the Arabs want to live a normal life. But these extremes and this violence that sort of erupted was frightening.
I mean, the point about extremes, though, is that they can be extremely powerful. I mean, the tail can wag the dog, because, I mean, we just on the politics of that for a moment, and it is small compared to the human scale. But the calculation that, Arabs could sit, Arab parties, including the Islamist party that we've talked about so often, led by Mansour Abbas, that they could sit in as legitimate partners, or, on the outside or inside of an Israeli government. That logic was blown apart by this week, because I think the idea was going to be that Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid would sit together. And from what I understand, Bennett has closed the door on that and said that's now out of the question, because he thinks that you cannot sit as a leader of a Jewish Israeli party with Arab political parties in this climate, because people won't wear it. That's my assumption. The idea that, that now a government that's sustained by Arab parties will not be accepted by Israeli public opinion when there are synagogues being burnt in Lod. Tell me if that's...
that's a safe assumption to make. First of all, we have to say this is really fresh news, right? I mean, we're talking here, it's Thursday midnight. This happened about 3 or 4 hours ago, that Naftali Bennett said that he won't create this what we call the change government, the Bennett-Lapid government. Firstly, we have to say Mansour Abbas suspended the negotiations with Israeli politicians the minute that the Israeli Air Force started to attack Gaza. It is partly what you said, right? That Naftali Bennett, I suppose, thought that in this climate it would be a problem, but also for Mansour Abbas it became a problem, because his thesis was this: I'm going to talk only about the problems, the civil problems, the budgets, etc., the problems of the Arab Israelis within the Green Line. I am not at all going to mention anything going on with the Palestinians or anything like that. And that blew up in his face. And it was impossible, quite literally. And it was impossible for him to continue that. So it changed reality, and it changed really quickly. I mean, we're talking, I started our conversation by saying a week has passed and it feels like a year. Everything here happened on overdrive, really.
Why don't you, because I think it will be helpful because it's been so quick, why don't you talk us through the events as they unfolded? In other words, sort of how.
Well, first of all, there was a British man and a French man called Sykes-Picot. They started this whole mess in the Middle East. They're to blame, really.
Where'd you start?
Where do you want to continue from that, Jonathan?
Well, why don't we
this
just
is the problem when you try to explain things.
Why don't we say, okay, listeners, we're bang up to date last week. Just to give us the 7-day version. What happened? That where we were last week,
7-hour version, maybe?
We were thinking, and we were not alone. We were talking about, is it going to be, are we counting down the days till Netanyahu leaves office and a new government comes in? That's where we were a week ago. And yes, there was big trouble brewing in Jerusalem, and we talked about where it came from. And suddenly we are in this. So just talk us through from A to B.
For me to be going through Y and Z, basically, but I will try and explain what happened. What essentially happened was tensions mounting in Jerusalem around the Al-Aqsa Mosque. There are all kinds of different things going on there. From the Palestinian perspective, Israelis made a few mistakes. It was the month of Ramadan. They tried to stop, the Israeli police were in some points incompetent. They tried to stop buses of prayers coming in. There was incidents of rioting, and then they threw some tear gas into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, all kinds of things like that kind of drew tensions. And then Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's the extreme right in Israel, walking through the Damascus Gate and going to Sheikh Jarrah, sort of, I hope I'm trying to make some sense. I'm sorry, I haven't slept for 3 nights, so maybe I'm not going through this in an orderly fashion like you wanted. But tensions mounted, and Hamas, I say this sadly, was smart to harness this and convince not only the people of Jerusalem that the Palestinians of East Jerusalem, saying you had Muhammad Def, who's from Hamas, saying for the first time in a long time, we heard him speak, saying, if you continue to do this in Jerusalem, if police continue to do this in Jerusalem, we are going to attack. Hamas is going to attack. And he indeed did. So that is how this whole thing started, and that's how we wound up where we were.
Yeah, and so there's rocket attacks from Hamas. Israel immediately responds with airstrikes, and we get into that. And then it explodes onto the streets of those mixed cities in Israel, and that's where we are.
Also, again, we have to say again that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is something of a magnet that pulls, indeed, also the Arab Israelis into the fray.
I mean, let's just do it. Let's go through the vantage point of the different players in this and how they see it, because I think that will be useful. I mean, we can, both of us, just based on reporting that we've been doing, I know both of us have been speaking to analysts of this situation. I was on the phone for a long time today to a very long time sort of Palestinian analyst and sometime negotiator who was just, fascinating on what's going on, the calculus on their side, that Hamas, you can see the opportunity they thought here, which is we will now take a stance as the custodians, the defenders of the holy sites in Jerusalem. We can steal a march on Mahmoud Abbas sitting there in Ramallah. He's only just spoken really in the last few minutes, finally said something. He had not said anything. And so Hamas can step forward as we are the defenders of the Palestinian people, and indeed the Muslim nation defending the third holiest site in Islam. You can see what was in it for them to do that. They make Mahmoud Abbas look really bad, inert and inactive,
especially after he canceled the elections. Yeah.
There we are. We said at the same time. So you can see the calculation from their point of view. It's fascinating to me that apparently the biggest minds in Israeli intelligence did not see this coming. Their calculation was that Hamas would not want to fight. Deterrence was working. Is this a big intelligence failure from the Israelis in terms of reading Hamas's mood?
Well, I, as someone who's listened to top Israeli brass for the last couple of months, giving background conversations to journalists, and you always heard that kind of assumption that Yahya Sinwar decided to basically build the infrastructure in Gaza, help the people of Gaza. Not to, of course, give up the ideology of Hamas, which is to annihilate Israel. But for now, he prefers that. He prefers that quiet and not the road to terror. So I don't know what happened there in the last couple of days. And is it an internal argument within Hamas? I think nobody really knows right now. To turn back to this idea, was it because of Al-Aqsa? Was it seizing an opportunity? Was it something they planned and the Israeli intelligence missed it? It's a question that I don't know how to answer, but I'm sure that we will know the answer to.
Yeah. And then from the Israeli side, this is the question, the sort of dark question that seizes me, which is, we were talking about the kind of build-up that was going on last week, and it was multiple things. That curious decision of the police to close off that area in front of Damascus Gate. Mm-hmm. But the whole business of Sheikh Jarrah, this area that, of historic homes that are in East Jerusalem, where there are Jewish settlers who claim a kind of historic title to those properties going back before 1948 and say, therefore, these belongs to us. They want the court to say these homes belong to us and the Palestinians be evicted. And just as the impression I get from the outside is there are all these, it's Ramadan, it's Jerusalem Day, this tinder was piling up. Mm-hmm. And the Prime Minister Netanyahu does not think, this is dangerous. I better make sure there are no sparks and no lit matches anywhere near this. He doesn't do that. He allowed it to get more and more tense. And here we are now, where the opportunity for a new government is apparently falling apart. The dark, cynical question I ask to myself is, was there a calculation from Netanyahu's point of view, which was, the one thing that could scupper a non-Bibi government is a massive security crisis. And if the country's at war, the country's going to cling to me. Am I too cynical for that question to pop into my head?
It's definite that Netanyahu's opponents, his detractors in this country, are asking that question, right? Is it incompetence? Is it police incompetence on that level that we mentioned, or is it a decision from above to throw in more and more matches into this arena, into this fire? So a lot of people, again, on the anti-Bibi camp are saying, I don't know how much they're saying that he kind of really deliberately lit the fire, but that he didn't do everything he could to sort of turn it off, because it's not, as we say, it's not necessarily bad for him, this chaos. I think that the fact that people actually ask this question is the problem, in the sense that it seems like there's many people in this country who don't trust the leader to the extent that they would think that he would instigate this whole thing. So that is something that I think is an issue to be discussed. But again, we need to remember two things about Netanyahu. A, he doesn't like to start wars. He really tried to sort of avoid doing that for many years in many cases. And also in the kind of really 24 hours that led to the big Hamas sending rockets to Jerusalem, he was actually trying to de-escalate as fast as he could, taking off the barricades of Damascus Gate, doing other things to kind of de-escalate. That wasn't enough. So I don't know if I answered your question, Jonathan.
No,
I did pretend to.
No, I think you're really right. It says something, because it wasn't just me who had that question. Like you say, this question was surfacing in Israel, and and it says something terrible about a national leader, that people would even ask the question. So I agree. No, I think I was going to get onto was a bit about the outside world, and particularly the United States, because that they are normally the big player in the Middle East conflict, and that's who you would expect to come into things. And Joe Biden has done not that much. I mean, he had a call with Bibi, I think, on Wednesday, and he came out after saying, we want this to come to an end as soon as we can. But obviously Israelis have a right to defend themselves. There was some backlash because he didn't say Palestinians have a right to defend themselves. He just made that point. But people think, come on, we need the new American administration to come in and start talking to Egypt, and Egypt can lean on Hamas, and Biden and Washington can lean on Israel, and you'll broker a ceasefire. And just as luck would have it, I was in conversation this week with Dennis Ross, who listeners will know, really long time, 3-decade-long peace negotiator for the United States on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And he's the improbable star of a new, and I have to say, extraordinarily riveting documentary film called The Human Factor, which is made by Dror Morer, the man who made The Gatekeepers, another incredibly good film. And it's all about the American peace team. People we've mentioned on the podcast before, Dennis Ross, Martin Indyk, all those people. Anyway, I was talking to Dennis Ross. And so my question to him was, we get the impression that Joe Biden's got 1,000,001 things he would rather do than this. He wants to deal with COVID and reboot the economy and maybe deal with China and Russia and get out of Afghanistan. He needs this like a hole in the head. But what will he do? And he just said something really interesting. He said, my advice always to presidents is, you may want to leave the Middle East, but the Middle East won't leave you. It will always come back to you and grab and sort of pull you in. And it's happened quicker than you'd think. Barely 100, it's just over 100 days. And essentially the region is saying to Joe Biden, come back in.
I'm going to be blunt and Israeli about this for a minute. This administration didn't want anything to do with Israel and the Palestinians. Let's be honest. I mean, you heard Tony Blinken in his hearings in the Senate saying, basically, we know this is not a Palestinian state is not going to happen now. This is essentially what he was saying. And they wanted to deal with Iran, so they knew they had to talk to Israel about that, but they didn't want to deal with this issue. And even when you look at, think back to when there were last negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. This is 9 years ago. Okay, many people have already left the sort of echelon, the State Department, a lot of the people who are relevant are not there. Add upon that the fact there's no ambassador here, there's no U.S. ambassador in Israel, and you get a whole sort of situation which it's harder to kind of pull back the situation we're in now.
Yeah, I mean, so this is the thing. I think now that position of sort of hands off, we don't want to be there, we'd rather not be here, that the unsustainability of that position has been exposed now. I think the Americans are going to have to they're going to have an ambassador, they're going to have to start staffing up, they're going to have to do things for this, and it will be really fascinating to watch whether they can just do a little bit. Can they put their toe in this pond, or are they going to get pulled in and submerged in it? Because it is a bit of a sort of vortex that does suck people in. And Biden has been around a long time, and he's seen, predecessors and previous secretaries of state and others just get completely mired in this. So he doesn't want that. But I think they're going to have to do that in order to just see if they can restore calm, as it were, to broker some ceasefire. The Egyptians, the Qataris, they're big players. They have juice with Hamas, and somehow broker this. The bigger question after that, to my mind, and I'm sort of, in a way, getting ahead of myself, but I can't help but wonder. Let's say, and it cannot come at a moment too soon, but let's say there is the restoration of quiet and calm. Do, policymakers and everyone then just go back to the status quo ante? Is that what everyone wants? We go back to how we were between 2014 and a week ago, back to normal. And my worry, and this goes a little bit to a conversation you and I had, a very spirited conversation a few weeks back, I don't think you can go back to normal.
When you say spirited, do you mean I won?
Spirited is me being very British about it was spirited. You can't go back to normal because normal is what got us here. And that's the worry I would have. I think Israelis particularly, but I think it fascinating. My conversation with Palestinians today was they think the same is true on their side in different ways. Definitely true of the rest of the international community. Everyone kind of the status quo works for a lot of people. It doesn't work for it works for the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah, who actually keep their positions and their power and their authority as long as everything's just ticking over. It works for the UN and the US because then they can do other things, the EU. It works for, and this is the harder thing, I think it works for Israel and it works for Israelis. When they can just say the situation is on hold, we can go to the beach, we can have a vaccine rollout, we can have tech startups, a brilliant economy, and it's all great. The people it doesn't work for are Gazans who are, besieged, and it doesn't work for regular Palestinians who are living for decades and decade after occupation. But for everyone else, make it quiet, make it go away, and we can go back and we can have another 7 years like the 7 years we had before. To me, the big challenge is, can you make this the wake-up call that says, no, we cannot go back to before. We have to deal with the inherent underlying conflict that means violence erupts periodically every 5 years, every 7 years. We have to deal with the causes of that.
Well, things have, of course, become more complicated because Hamas took over Gaza. Now, Israel made a strategic decision, and I think that this is something to put the finger on. Benjamin Netanyahu, as Israel's prime minister, made a decision, which is, I don't want to deal with the Palestinian Authority, essentially. They have the autonomy. I want to deal with Hamas in the way that I will let them have Qatari money. I will try as best as I can to control the fact that that money isn't going into weapons and development of weapons, but to the betterment of the people of Gaza. Israel isn't entirely successful in that, obviously, but that is what we will do, and that we will buy quiet, quote unquote. Now, when you talk about solving the situation, which it should be resolved, what do you do with the fact that Israel essentially left Gaza, right? It is besieged, as you just described it, also because of Egyptian decisions, but Israel left Gaza. And there's a terror organization that is holding the people of Gaza hostage. And what do you do with that? And shooting to Israel, right? Now, what do you do with that? Look, I've seen, and believe me, I know that every time that this happens, there is a lot of anti-Israel rhetoric around the world. I see this. And you ask yourself, wait a minute, you know where a lot of the Hamas officials are hiding, right? They're hiding under Shifa Hospital in Gaza. Israel's not bombing the hospital because Israel doesn't do that. You see the pictures of the buildings toppling, that Israel's toppling buildings. The buildings are empty because Israel's giving a notification for people to leave the building. They just want to ruin Hamas offices. Now, this situation is incredibly complex because, again, what do you do? I'm asking, I don't know if this is a rhetorical question, but what do you do with the fact that there is a terrorist organization that doesn't actually want to speak with you, that rules Gaza? And it makes things much more complicated. We had a spirited argument, Jonathan, about the situation, the 54 years of Israel and Palestinians being in this situation, but Gaza complicates things. And I don't know, I really don't know what the way to solve it is.
No, I know. Look, solve
was that spirited as well?
It's good. Solve is definitely not the right word for me to have used, really, because and again, Dennis Ross was very good on that. That we're not in that mode. Managing would be nice. Solving is not good. But let me just say one thing about the thing is, I agree about how difficult Gaza is. But one thing about this current thing that's erupted this week is just at the internal level. Let's just start with that. The Arabs of Lod, the Arabs of Haifa, the Arabs of Tiberias, those mixed cities, do Israelis think that you can pass something like the nation state law, which says, national rights are for us, Jews, you Arabs, you can be citizens here, but you won't have the same level of rights as we're going to have? Do they think you can keep saying that and the people will just shrug and go, okay, that's fine, we'll swallow that indefinitely? Can you keep doing that? So just start with that in a way. The requirement for equality in a deep way between all the citizens of the country, even before you get to occupation, even before you get to the West Bank, let alone Gaza. What I'm saying is, I hope that if anything comes out of this horror that we're seeing, it will be a feeling that we don't just go back to how we were 7 days ago, but think we've got to just at least address why it was that people who are citizens of this country nevertheless felt, so pent up that they are on the streets in that way. Look, I know they're not typical, just as the rightists, the far rightists on the march are also not typical of, Jewish Israelis. Of course not. But there's problems there to deal with. And my concern is, let's get this over with. But when it is over with, I don't think everyone can just go back to the beach. They've got to think about why this keeps happening in this country, which doesn't happen in other countries around the world.
I should not have sent you those pictures from the beach last week. I get that.
It's punishment.
I get that was a mistake. You thought I was having more fun than you, and now you're upset. No, the point is, I was on that Friday having more fun than you. I just want to make that official.
You definitely.
Look, you point to something that I think is incredibly important. And I think that Arab Israelis have suffered from discrimination. The president of this country, Reuven Rivlin, has talked about it. Many other people have talked about it. I think there have been also attempts to try and solve that. I think that there is still a gap between the fact that there are issues like the nation state law, which, again, there's some politicians who promise to change that, and mobs, rampaging houses and burning cars. Nothing can be an excuse for that. I'm sure we agree on that. And I think that what is important here, and I think, the root of this, there is a problem of, for example, a lot of illegal weapons in Arab Israelis, among Arab Israelis. They have been begging the administration in this country to deal with this because there are many, many innocent people who are killed in Arab cities in Israel, 113 last year. And they've been telling people, you don't care about this because it isn't targeting you Jewish Israelis. And the minute it will be, you'll have to deal with this. So, of course, there are problems that we are going to have to deal with, and they're serious issues. And I hope they will be addressed.
Well, whatever happens, we know it's not going to be addressed, let alone resolved, by the panacea that in a way we were sort of talking about in previous weeks, which was the notion of Arab participation in an Israeli government with the Joint List or Mansour Abbas and his Islamist party somehow going in there to make Lapid and Bennett rotating prime ministers. That looked like it was going to be on the cards.
Yeah.
From what we've heard and from what's happening, Yonit, it seems like that's not really going to happen.
No. Lapid still has the mandate for 20 days, but Naftali Bennett, as we said tonight, that that is not an option for him anymore, that kind of government. We talked about what could have been his motives, again, all in the shadow of what has been going on in Israel for the past week. And what we see as two options now is either, again, fifth elections, or Netanyahu somehow managing to form a government. Whatever Netanyahu does, the interesting thing, and maybe it's some sort of paradox here, but he still will need Mansour Abbas's vote or support for many of the steps he wants to do. So you will still see a sort of involvement, but it proves one axiom that has always been true in Israeli politics. Never, ever rule Benjamin Netanyahu out, even when you think he is very close to being out.
Yep. And I'm afraid we did say that, both of us, on this podcast over and over again. We were talking about rabbits out of hat and was he out of bunnies and all that. And the thing is, you just cannot count him out, whether you take the most cynical reading of these recent events or not, one way or another. It is never over. I think I said, until he was physically out of that chair, I would not believe he would not be prime minister. Bennett himself, of course, was the man who was in the frame to be prime minister. And he was asked about his ambitions just this very week. We can hear a bit of that.
I'm not going to discuss domestic politics on this interview. What I will say is any government I participate in or lead, under no circumstances will I allow myself to have my hands tied while defending my people. So we and I will always do the right thing for the good of the state of Israel and its citizens, regardless of the political machine.
So you are confident you will be the next Prime Minister of Israel to be sworn in just a few weeks' time?
No, I'm not confident. It's a very complicated and difficult situation, and certainly it's pretty messy. Israeli politics are pretty messy, unfortunately. But we're doing our best to get the country out of this muddle. I don't want to get to fifth elections within 2.5 years. That's certainly not what Israel is about. I grew up in the high-tech arena, in the military. We worked very orderly, and this is quite a mess, I have to admit.
That was Bennett telling Becky Anderson on CNN that he's still his plans and he's contemplating still to be prime minister. That was 2 days ago. Things actually move very fast in Israeli politics, as we noticed.
I wonder if there was a little bit of reluctance in him, always about this prime minister thing. I somehow think in the sort of Shakespeare play, he didn't quite have the sort of steel in the spine to really grab the crown, and sort of was reaching, not quite for the first excuse, but here is the very first obstacle he faced in terms of becoming prime minister. And straight away he says, okay, someone else. I just wonder if it goes to a sort of reluctance in Naftali Bennett, but who knows? Events have taken their own course. We will hand out Chutzpah and Mensch awards as always next week. For now, though, please do recommend us, pass this on, give us those wonderful, and you've been doing that, some very, very warm reviews, and of course share, tweet, put us on Instagram, and all other forms of recommendation. Who do we need to thank, Yonit?
Oh, I will thank in a minute. By the way, it was Mother's Day in the United States this week. I know you guys do it sometime in, what is it, March? Yes, we don't do it at all. By the way, Israelis don't do it at all. Mother's Day has been canceled and turned into Family Day, which is very annoying. So, so happy Mother's Day. And we will say thank you to our executive producer, Lior Friedman, to Rom Atik, head of podcasts, and to Irad Escher for original music. And let's hope for better news and a better mood next week, Jonathan.
Yeah, that is my hope too. See you then, Yonit.
See you.